Sometimes the most painful chapters in our lives are the ones that shape us the most, and yet, in the moment, they make no sense at all. A door closes, a person leaves, plans fall apart, and suddenly we're left questioning everything. It feels like life is working against us, but what if it isn't? What if the very thing you're struggling with right now is the beginning of something greater, something meant for you, but not yet understood? In Buddhism, there's a powerful teaching that nothing is random. Every experience, every joy, every loss is part of a deeper unfolding. And the more we learn to trust that, even in uncertainty, the more peace we find. Today's video is about that journey. It's about understanding the hidden order beneath life's chaos and how Buddha's wisdom can guide us through even our darkest seasons. So please, don't skip any part of this video. Each moment builds on the next, and I truly believe that by the end, something will shift in the way you see your path. And if what we're building here speaks to your heart, even in a small way, there's a simple and completely free way to support it. Just hit the subscribe button. That one action helps us continue sharing Buddhist wisdom with the world. There are days when everything feels like a blur, like you're walking through your life, but it doesn't feel like it's really yours. You do the things you're supposed to do. You get up, you go to work, you take care of responsibilities. But deep down, there's this heavy fog, this strange emptiness that you can't quite explain. Something feels off, even if nothing is visibly broken. And then, out of nowhere, something happens. A person you counted on walks away. A dream you've nurtured starts falling apart. Or maybe it's just the slow unraveling of everything you thought was certain. In those moments, you begin to wonder, what's the point of all this? It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking we must have done something wrong. We replay moments in our minds. We question our choices. We blame ourselves. And maybe worst of all, we start believing that life is punishing us. But Buddhism gently invites us to see things differently. The Buddha taught that life is not linear. It doesn't follow our plans, and it's not here to meet our expectations. Instead, it unfolds according to a deeper rhythm, a rhythm we often can't hear because we're too busy trying to control the music. What's difficult about these moments is that they don't come with answers. There's no obvious lesson, no quick fix, just confusion. And it's in that confusion that we grow. But we rarely see it that way at first. We just feel the pain. We feel the disorientation. Buddha never told us that life would make sense all the time. In fact, one of the central teachings is that clinging to understanding, clinging to certainty, is a major source of our suffering. Because life isn't meant to be predictable. It's meant to be lived, fully, honestly, moment by moment. There's a beautiful image in Buddhist thought, life as a vast ocean and we as small boats navigating the waves. Sometimes the sea is calm and everything feels steady, but other times the waves crash and we feel like we're sinking. The trick is not to fight the ocean, it's to learn how to float, to trust that the current, no matter how strong, is still carrying us somewhere meaningful. Think about it. How many times have you looked back at a moment that felt like the end, only to realize later that it was the beginning? At the time, it felt like your whole world was falling apart. But with distance, with clarity, you see it wasn't falling apart, it was falling into place. That's not just some feel-good idea, that's Dharma. The invisible order of things, that's the wisdom Buddha shared over 2,500 years ago. That life in all its messiness has meaning, even when we can't yet see it. We aren't meant to have all the answers right away. Sometimes the lesson is patience, sometimes it's surrender, and sometimes it's simply learning to be with what is, without needing to label it as good or bad. In Buddhism, we are taught to sit with our discomfort, to breathe into our uncertainty, to trust that even in our confusion, we are exactly where we need to be. There's a moment in every person's life when pain shows up uninvited. It doesn't knock, it doesn't wait for a convenient time. It just enters, unexpected, overwhelming, and often without explanation. And in that moment we feel small, lost and alone. We ask ourselves, why me? What did I do to deserve this? It's a natural response because pain feels so personal, so heavy. And yet if we look through the lens of Buddha's teachings, we begin to understand that pain isn't here to destroy us. It's here to awaken something deeper within us, something we didn't even know we were ready to face. Buddhism doesn't ask us to glorify suffering. It doesn't romanticize pain. What it does is help us relate to it differently. The Buddha was very clear. Pain is a part of life. Every living being, no matter how rich, wise or spiritual, will encounter moments of loss, illness, disappointment and grief. This is what he called dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness of life. But here's the part most people overlook. While pain is unavoidable, our relationship with that pain is what determines our suffering. That's where our freedom lies. That's where wisdom begins. When something painful happens, most of us react with resistance. We push it away. We pretend it isn't happening. Or we desperately try to fix it, to return to how things were before. But the truth is, the version of us that existed before the pain can't carry us forward. Something has to shift. And that shift often begins with stillness, with the willingness to sit with our discomfort and listen. Buddhism encourages us to meet our pain not with fear or denial, but with gentle awareness. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this?" we ask, "What is this trying to show me?" There's a teaching from the Buddha that compares suffering to being shot with an arrow. The first arrow is the event, the loss, the betrayal, the hardship. That pain is real. But then we shoot ourselves with a second arrow. The anger, the blame, the endless what-ifs and why-me's. And that second arrow often causes even more suffering than the first. Buddhism invites us to stop shooting that second arrow, to feel what's real without layering it with unnecessary judgment or resistance. That's not a weakness. That's the beginning of true inner strength. You see, pain isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's a cleansing, a teacher in disguise. It burns away our illusions, strips us of false identities, and leaves only what is essential. Like fire purifies gold, difficulty purifies the mind and heart. The ego hates this process. It wants comfort, control, and certainty. But the soul? The soul knows that pain is often the doorway to transformation. Some of our most profound insights, our deepest compassion, our strongest boundaries, come not from peaceful times, but from walking through the fire and coming out changed. There's also something sacred about shared suffering. When we experience pain, we start to see others more clearly. We recognize the struggle in their eyes. We soften. We listen more. We judge less. Suffering connects us. It reminds us that beneath all our differences, we are all navigating a life filled with impermanence, loss, and change. Buddha himself didn't attain enlightenment by avoiding hardship. He left his palace and walked into the heart of suffering because he knew that the path to awakening wasn't found in escape, but in understanding. There's something quietly overwhelming about pain. It narrows our vision. When we're hurting, all we can see is the hurt. It takes over our thoughts, our energy, and even how we see ourselves. Everything becomes colored by that one event, that one loss, that one moment that didn't go the way we hoped. And in that space, it's easy to feel like we are drowning in it, as if the pain is all there is. But Buddhism invites us to take a step back, not to run away from the pain, but to observe it from a larger view. Because when we zoom out, something profound happens. We stop identifying so completely with our suffering, and we begin to see it as part of a much greater story. The Buddha taught that our minds are like lenses. They shape our perception of the world. When our lens is small and tight, everything appears distorted. The smallest discomfort becomes unbearable. The tiniest failure feels like the end. But when we expand that lens, when we cultivate spaciousness in our awareness, we realize that even the hardest moments are just one part of the vast, unfolding journey of our life. Think of a storm. It can look terrifying when you're caught in it. But from a distance, from above the clouds, it's just a temporary pattern in the sky, passing like all things do. There's a beautiful Buddhist story that speaks to this. A young man came to his teacher, overwhelmed by the bitterness in his life. The teacher handed him a spoonful of salt and told him to dissolve it in a small glass of water and drink it. The man did and grimaced. It was undrinkable. Then the teacher took him to a quiet lake and asked him to drop the same amount of salt into the water. When he tasted the lake, it was fresh and pure. The pain, the teacher said, is the salt. It's the same. What matters is the size of the container you place it in. This is the heart of Buddhist wisdom. Suffering shrinks or expands based on the space we give it. When we broaden our perspective, we're not denying our pain. We're just placing it within the context of a larger picture. One setback doesn't define your life. One loss doesn't erase your worth. One broken relationship doesn't mean you're unlovable. But in the tight grip of emotion, it's hard to remember that. That's why mindfulness is such a powerful practice. It trains us to be present without getting trapped. It allows us to feel our feelings fully, but not be consumed by them. We begin to witness our suffering instead of becoming it. This wider lens also helps us see the impermanence of all things, a core teaching of the Buddha. No experience, no emotion, no pain lasts forever. It rises, it peaks, and it passes. When we hold this truth close, we stop reacting so intensely to temporary discomfort. We start trusting the rhythm of life more, realizing that everything, even the difficult parts, is just moving us forward. Just like seasons shift, so do the seasons within us. There's a strange comfort in routine. When life feels predictable, when we know what's coming next, we feel safe, like we're in control. But as soon as something disrupts that rhythm, we panic. A job is lost, a relationship ends, or a health scare appears out of nowhere. And suddenly what once felt like a steady path becomes unfamiliar and chaotic. Most of us instinctively try to get back to normal as quickly as possible. But Buddhism teaches something radical, that chaos, disruption, and confusion are not signs that something's gone wrong. They are part of the path. Sometimes they are the path. When the Buddha spoke of dukkha, suffering or dissatisfaction, he wasn't just pointing to pain. He was pointing to our resistance to change. The mind craves certainty. It wants life to follow a script. But life doesn't work that way. It never has, and it never will. Everything is impermanent. Everything is in motion. The seasons change. The tides shift. Trees grow, fall, and grow again. Nothing stays the same. And when we fight this truth, we suffer. Not because life is cruel, but because we're refusing to flow with it. The Buddha didn't promise us comfort. He offered us clarity. He taught that understanding the nature of impermanence frees us from unnecessary pain. Think about the times in your life when you grew the most. Were they peaceful, predictable seasons? Probably not. Growth rarely happens when everything is easy. It happens when we're challenged, when we're stretched, when we're forced to let go of who we thought we were and make space for who we're becoming. There's a reason so many spiritual teachings speak of darkness before light, storms before calm. In Buddhist tradition, even the journey to enlightenment begins with suffering, with seeing the world clearly for the first time and recognizing its impermanent, unsatisfying nature. It's tempting to see chaos as something to avoid. But what if it's a necessary part of transformation? A seed cannot grow unless it's buried in darkness first. A butterfly can't fly unless it breaks out of the cocoon on its own. If you help it too early, it never builds the strength it needs to survive. In the same way, when life pushes us into chaos, It's not always to harm us. Sometimes it's to make us stronger, to teach us something we couldn't learn any other way. The Buddha often reminded his followers that awakening doesn't come from staying comfortable. It comes from seeing things as they truly are, even when that's painful. And when the ground beneath you is shaking, when everything familiar seems to be crumbling, there's a hidden opportunity to wake up, to stop sleepwalking through life, to stop pretending that we can control everything. Chaos forces us to ask deeper questions. It pulls us out of autopilot and invites us to truly see what matters. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" Buddhism invites us to ask, "What is this moment asking of me? What can I learn from this? What old patterns need to fall away? What strength is being developed in me right now?" It's not about glorifying suffering or pretending it's fun. It's about seeing that within the chaos there is always a seed of wisdom. Always. Sometimes life feels unfair in a way that makes you want to throw your hands up and ask, "What's the point of all this?" You do everything right, you show up, you try to be kind, and still things fall apart. You lose someone. Something you were counting on slips away. Or maybe you're stuck, waiting for answers that never seem to come. It's in those quiet, frustrating spaces that we start wondering if life has any real order at all, or if it's just a series of random, painful events. But according to the Buddha's teachings, what looks like chaos on the surface is often part of something far more intelligent, far more purposeful than we can see in the moment. In Buddhism, that deeper intelligence is called Dharma. It's one of the most beautiful and grounding concepts in the entire path. Dharma is not just a spiritual word or a vague idea about being good. It's the very fabric of natural law, the unseen rhythm that guides everything from the blooming of flowers to the unfolding of our lives. It's not about reward or punishment. It's not karma in the sense of tit for tat. It's more like a compass that always points us toward our highest potential, even if the road it leads us down doesn't look like what we expected. When something doesn't go our way, we tend to assume it's wrong, that it's a mistake, or worse, a sign that we've failed. But Dharma teaches something radically different. It says that everything is happening in alignment with a greater balance, even the delays, the losses, the heartbreaks. If something is removed from your life, it's because that thing no longer serves your growth. If something is delayed, it's because the time isn't yet right. If you're facing resistance, it's not to punish you, it's to prepare you. From the Buddhist view, life isn't a straight line of constant progress. It's a sacred spiral, moving through seasons we don't always understand. There's a reason Buddhist monks spend so much time observing nature. Because nature reflects Dharma perfectly. The tree doesn't rush its growth. The river doesn't fight the rocks in its path. It simply flows around them. The moon doesn't worry if it's waxing or waning, it just follows its course. But humans, with all our thinking and planning and clinging, we resist that flow. We try to force our own timelines. We get upset when life doesn't match our expectations. And that's often where suffering begins, not from the event itself, but from our refusal to trust the rhythm of our lives. One of the most meaningful insights from the Buddha is that suffering arises when we go against the grain of reality. That doesn't mean we should stop setting goals or give up on making choices. It means we learn to listen more deeply. We pay attention to the signs life is offering us. We honor when it's time to act, and we honor when it's time to be still. Dharma isn't passive. It invites us to participate in our lives, but with awareness, with trust, and with humility. When something ends, we ask, what is life making space for? When we're blocked, we ask, what is this trying to show me? And when we're unsure, we learn to wait without panic, because we know the current is still moving. We all grow up with this quiet belief that if we just try hard enough, plan well enough, and stay in control, things will go the way we want. It starts early. Study hard and you'll succeed. Be kind and others will treat you well. Work smart and life will reward you. And so we build our lives like carefully stacked blocks, expecting that if we keep everything in order, nothing will collapse. But then something does. The job you thought was secure disappears overnight. The person you trusted leaves. The plan you were sure of unravels, and you're left standing there wondering how everything slipped through your fingers when you were doing all the right things. This is where Buddhism offers a truth that is both challenging and freeing. The need for control is one of the biggest illusions we carry. Buddha taught that attachment to people, outcomes, identities, and expectations is the root of suffering, and control is just another form of attachment. It's a way we try to protect ourselves from the discomfort of uncertainty. But life doesn't follow our scripts. It doesn't move in straight lines, and the more we try to hold on, the more tension we create inside ourselves. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. No matter how tightly you grip, it still slips through. There's a practice in Buddhism called non-clinging. It doesn't mean giving up on your goals or letting go of all desire. It means recognizing that we can take action without being attached to how everything turns out. It's the art of effort without obsession, of movement without desperation, and it begins with a deep breath and a shift in perspective. We still plan, we still care, but we no longer try to force life to match our timeline. We show up fully, then let go of the outcome. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. One of the teachings that helps here is Wu Wei, a concept often translated as effortless action or non-doing. It's not about laziness or passivity. It's about aligning with the natural flow of life instead of pushing against it. Think of a river. You can fight it, try to swim upstream and exhaust yourself. Or you can learn to float, to navigate with the current. That's what Wu Wei is about. Learning when to act and when to step back, when to lead and when to surrender. Buddha never said don't act. He said act with awareness and non-attachment. He said to do your part, then trust the unfolding. The truth is, much of our anxiety comes not from what's happening, but from our resistance to it. We cling to how we think things should be. We rehearse what could go wrong. We chase perfect outcomes. And in doing so, we miss the life that's happening right now. We miss the lessons, the small joys, the quiet moments of peace that are only available when we're not caught in a mental tug-of-war with reality. Letting go doesn't mean we stop caring. It means we stop clinging. It means we trust that life is intelligent, that it's unfolding in ways we can't always understand in the moment. There's a strange kind of discomfort that comes not from pain itself, but from not knowing what's next. That feeling of standing at a crossroads without a map, unsure which direction life is going to take. We try to guess, plan, predict, but deep down we know that control is an illusion. And it's in those moments of uncertainty that we tend to panic the most. Our minds search for guarantees, for outcomes we can cling to. But Buddhism teaches us something radically different. It invites us to stop chasing certainty and instead learn to relax into the unknown. Because what we fear is not really the future, it's our inability to script it. Buddha understood the nature of the mind. He saw how deeply we crave security, how much suffering comes from our need to know. But life, by its very nature, is impermanent. Nothing stays fixed. Everything changes. Our thoughts, our relationships, our plans, even our bodies. So the question becomes, if we can't stop life from changing, how do we find peace within it? And the answer, according to Buddhist teachings, lies not in resisting change, but in learning to move with it. It's about softening our grip. It's about building trust, not just in the universe, but in ourselves and our ability to face whatever comes. Think about it. How many times have you faced something you thought you couldn't handle? And yet here you are. You survived. You learned. You adapted. That strength didn't come from having a perfect plan. It came from your willingness to walk through uncertainty one step at a time. And this is the heart of Buddhist practice, being fully present with what is, not what we want to happen, not what we fear might happen, just this moment, just now. When we drop into the present, we find that it holds everything we need. Even in the middle of the unknown, there is still breath, there is still space, there is still life unfolding. One of the most powerful metaphors in Buddhist tradition is that of the ocean. Life is like water. It moves, it shifts, it flows in directions we cannot always control. When we try to resist the current, we exhaust ourselves. But when we learn to float, when we learn to trust the rhythm of the waves, we find we can stay afloat even in the storm. It doesn't mean we stop caring or stop trying. It means we stop grasping. We stop demanding that life follow our timeline, and we start responding with grace instead of fear. There's also a beautiful story about a monk who lived high in the mountains. One day, a villager came rushing up to warn him of an approaching storm. "You have to leave before it hits," he said. But the monk, calm and unmoved, replied, "If the storm comes, I will welcome it. If it passes, I will welcome that too." That kind of inner stability doesn't come from controlling the weather. It comes from understanding that no matter what happens, peace is something we carry inside us, not something we wait to find outside. This monk wasn't fearless because he had special powers. He was fearless because he had let go of the need for things to go his way. There's something strange about the way life teaches us. The lessons don't usually arrive in quiet, peaceful moments. They come in the middle of heartbreak, disappointment, and uncertainty. And what's even more surprising is how, over time, we come to realize that those painful experiences were actually the most important ones. At the time, of course, we don't see it that way. When we're hurting, it just feels unfair. We wonder what we did wrong. We question our path, our choices, even our worth. But Buddha's teachings remind us that life isn't punishing us, it's waking us up. Suffering in Buddhism is not something to be feared. It's not a flaw in life, it's a feature. The Buddha said that suffering is one of the 3 marks of existence, not because life is cruel, but because life is always changing. And when we resist that change, when we cling to things that are meant to evolve, we suffer. But hidden inside that suffering is a lesson, and that lesson is meant for our growth. It's not always easy to see it right away. Sometimes the wisdom only reveals itself after the storm has passed. But it's always there, quietly shaping us. Think about the most difficult experience you've gone through. Maybe it was a breakup, the loss of someone you loved, or a time when your plans completely fell apart. In the moment, it likely felt like chaos, like something was being ripped away. But look at who you became because of it. Maybe you discovered a strength you didn't know you had. Maybe it pushed you toward a new direction, one that felt more aligned with your true self. Or maybe it simply taught you compassion because you now understand pain in a deeper way. These are not small things. These are the foundations of awakening. Buddha taught that every moment holds the potential for mindfulness, for insight, for growth. That includes the painful moments. When we stop running from discomfort and start turning toward it with curiosity, everything changes. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" we begin asking, "What is this trying to show me?" That small shift opens the door to transformation. Suddenly, even our struggles have meaning. They're not just random obstacles, they're messengers. And the more we listen, the more we learn. This doesn't mean we have to be grateful for pain while we're still in it. It's okay to feel sad, angry, or lost. Those emotions are part of being human. Buddhism doesn't ask us to pretend we're fine. It invites us to sit with what's real, to breathe through it, to understand that even our reactions are teaching us something. When we're honest about what we feel, we can begin to see the roots beneath it. That's where true insight begins. Sometimes the lesson is about patience, learning to wait without rushing the process. Other times, it's about letting go of people, of ideas, of who we thought we were supposed to be. And sometimes the lesson is simply to be here now, to stop reaching for answers and just feel what's present. These are the moments that chip away at our ego and reveal our deeper nature. They remind us that our worth doesn't come from perfection or achievement. It comes from presence, from awareness, from how we respond to life. We've all had those moments, times when life seemed to collapse around us, when we felt completely off course, unsure of why things were happening the way they were. You might look back on something that once broke your heart or completely derailed your plans, and at the time, it felt like the end. But then, slowly, a new path began to open. You started to see things more clearly. Maybe you found a strength in yourself you didn't know existed. Maybe you discovered something you truly needed, but didn't even realize was missing. This is the strange beauty of life. It doesn't always reveal its meaning right away. But over time, what once felt like chaos often becomes part of a story that actually makes perfect sense. Buddhism teaches us that life is not linear. The path is never just straight and simple. It twists, turns, folds in on itself, and takes us places we never planned to go. But that doesn't mean it's random. In fact, one of the central teachings of the Buddha is that everything arises from causes and conditions. Every experience you face is the result of a larger web of interconnection. Actions, choices, karma, and timing all working together. When we forget this, we tend to fall into the trap of labeling things as good or bad, success or failure. But from a Buddhist view, these labels are often just short-term judgments. We can't always know the long-term impact of something in the moment. What seems like a setback today might be the very thing that leads to your greatest growth tomorrow. There's a quiet kind of faith that begins to develop when you start to understand this. Not a blind faith, but a grounded trust in the unfolding of your own life. It's not about pretending everything is fine or forcing yourself to find silver linings. It's about pausing, breathing, and saying to yourself, I don't understand this now, but I trust that it belongs here. The Buddha often spoke about mindfulness as a way of seeing clearly, and part of that clarity is learning to hold space for uncertainty. Instead of rushing to fix or escape difficult experiences, we begin to observe them with openness. We allow them to be what they are, without jumping to conclusions about what they mean. When you start viewing life through this lens, something changes inside. You stop needing to control every outcome. You stop blaming yourself when things don't go as planned. And you begin to soften into the idea that even your detours and delays have value. You become more patient, not just with life, but with yourself. And you begin to see that your path, while different from others, is unfolding exactly as it should. There comes a point in life when you get tired of fighting everything, tired of needing all the answers, tired of trying to predict what's coming next. You realize that no matter how tightly you plan, how hard you try to make things work a certain way, life always has its own path, and most of the time, it doesn't ask for your permission. And in that realization, something unexpected happens. You begin to let go. Not because you've given up, but because you're finally ready to trust, not just in yourself, but in something greater, in the unfolding of life itself. Buddhism teaches us that clinging causes suffering. We suffer not because things change, but because we resist the change. We hold on so tightly to how we think life should be that we miss the beauty of what it is. The Buddha didn't ask us to control every moment. He invited us to become awake within it. He taught that life is not meant to be dominated or forced. It's meant to be lived, with awareness, with intention, and with deep trust in the natural rhythm of things. This trust is not passive. It's not about sitting back and hoping everything magically works out. It's about walking forward with an open heart, even when you don't have all the answers. It's about making peace with the unknown and believing that even the things you don't understand right now are serving a purpose. You might not see the whole picture yet, but that doesn't mean the picture isn't forming. Trust is being willing to keep going even when the path disappears under your feet. In Buddhism, this kind of trust is rooted in Dharma, the unseen order, the cosmic law that holds everything together. Dharma teaches us that things don't just happen randomly. Every experience is part of a larger balance. When something ends, it's making space. When something breaks, it's revealing what was fragile. When something hurts, it's calling you to pay attention. There's a quiet intelligence at work behind the scenes of your life. And when you begin to align with that, when you stop trying to force life and instead start flowing with it, you begin to move with grace, even through uncertainty. Think of the river. You can fight the current and wear yourself out, or you can float and be carried. Trust is learning to float, not by giving up control completely, but by surrendering to what you cannot control. You still paddle, you still choose your direction, but you let the river support you. That's the balance Buddhism teaches: effort and surrender, action and faith. You don't need to know how everything ends. You just need to know that this moment matters, that how you show up right now with kindness, presence, and openness shapes everything that comes next. There's a deep peace that comes when you stop needing every outcome to go your way. You stop living with tension in your chest, waiting for life to finally cooperate. Instead, you begin to breathe again. You stop clinging to relationships out of fear. You stop doubting every detour. You start to feel rooted even when life is moving fast. Because you trust that life isn't punishing you, it's guiding you. Every delay, every shift, every ending is part of your spiritual unfolding. Some of the most important transformations happen quietly, when no one is watching, when everything feels uncertain, and yet you choose to trust anyway. That choice, that moment of surrender, is where awakening begins. Thank you for being here, for walking this path with us, and for allowing these teachings to touch your heart. If this message stayed with you, there's another video waiting on the screen right now that may offer exactly what your spirit needs next. Until then, thank you for being a part of Buddhist Journey.